Thank you.
Thank you.
Rex Harrison.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present. This is my third presentation on the annual plan. The third time I've asked the council to contain rate rises, and I'm heartened by the fact that in their introduction to the draft annual plan, the mayor acknowledged that the rate rises in the long-term plan will result in an increasing burden on people in low and fixed incomes. It is now time to move beyond acknowledgement to action. Why? Well, for example, if the rate rises projected in the long-term plan go ahead as planned, then my rates are going to increase by $400 per quarter. My ability to pay rates will not increase by $400 per quarter. Something has to give. Now, ratepayers are being forced to economize to meet the increased rates demands. It's time the council set a good example by economizing itself. Where to begin? The first and obvious place to start is with cash handouts. I'm referring to the Canterbury Development Corporation and the money you give to tourism. It makes no sense to subsidize the business sector in these days of booming economy from ratepayers' funds, nor does it make sense to use ratepayers' funds to attract more tourists to Christchurch when our tourism infrastructure is already bursting at the seams. A good way to test whether or not these services are valued by the respective communities would be simply to ask them to fund them themselves. That would tell you whether or not these are valued. The other place where there's potential savings is in the capital program. The council must become much more realistic in its assessment of the likely capital costs. The classic example, of course, is the town hall with the well-publicized blowout in costs. Had the council anticipated these blowouts properly at the beginning, the project may well have been less ambitious in the beginning, and the ratepayers wouldn't be stuck with the cost of that blowout. The other capital program that needs to be challenged is cycleways. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but there are more cyclists on the road to Dyer's Pass than there are on the urban cycleways in town. I know because I live in Diamond Harbour, and I dodge cyclists regularly driving forth and back. I see far fewer cyclists in town. In fact, you're spending tens of millions of dollars to provide a facility that's being used for a few tens of people. So you need to rethink that from first principles. And if your objective is health, you've achieved far more by supporting the adventure park than you have by building cycleways in town. And finally, the issue of the uniform annual charge. The net effect of that is that people in New Brighton are paying more rates than they would if the uniform annual charge weren't there, and it means people in Fendleton, for example, are paying lower rates. That doesn't make any sense to me. Thank you.
I have been raising this with the people who've raised the uniform annual general charge, and I don't know if you were in the room when I did, but the uniform annual general charge, when it was in 2004 and 2005, and I've asked staff to go back further so that I can have a look at how it's tracked. It was 9.4% of rates back then. The proposal was to take it to 9.5%, which includes all of the fixed charges that have been instituted since then, including the waste management. It's not a perfect system, but it is still under 10%, which is actually at the lower end of what other councils have done. So it's really hard because you've got people who are on fixed incomes, as you've highlighted, who have high property values, and the services themselves that are in the fixed charge are generally those that apply generally, like waste management, for example.
The issue is one of incidence of rating. The incidence is higher in low capital value properties. If you have a uniform annual charge, the incidence is lower in high capital value properties if you have a uniform annual charge. I argue that this is iniquitous.
Right, okay. Sarah and Phil.
Thank you so much for that. I'm just wondering,
we used it on one of the largest capital project that we're starting work on at the moment in the planning phase in the stadium, that's going to have the biggest impact on rates, and whether you see that that's something that we should be planning to, or if there's comments on that.
Well, I haven't seen any numbers on the stadium, so I'm not competent to comment. The stadium may add value to Christchurch. Until I see those numbers, I won't know.
Yeah. So the current budget is twice the Cycleways budget, so at about $500 million.
Well, in that case, I would ask the council not to gold plate the stadium.
Phil?
Thank you very much for your submission again, Rex, and for pointing out very clearly in your written submission too about how, in fact, this is a regressive taxation, that the UH, Uniform General Annual Charge, contributing to rising income equality. I think we as councillors needed to hear that. I did want to ask you, in relation to your points about cycleways though, that are you aware, Rex, that there's some very good data now that shows that in terms of people commuting to work in Christchurch, 7% are now using bicycles. So if, I guess this is about the time, certain times of the day, of course, when perhaps not all of the public may be aware of the high cycle count on our cycleways. Just wondering if you're aware of that.
Well, the cyclists are certainly conspicuous by their absence when I'm in town.
It might be a matter of the time of the day.
Yeah. Look, thank you very much for your submission. We do appreciate it, and we'll continue to do our best to see if we can improve things.
Thank you for your time.